Hey guys! Today I'm making an Artdoll of my favorite character, Spyro. I've been a big fan since I've played the first game when it came out in 1998. I decided to give myself a challenge and make him 2 feet tall. As always, I work with 2 full body references, one for the front view and the other for the profile. I start with a ball of polystyrene that I cut to the right shape. I then mark the center of the head and place a line for the eyes. I also cut another piece for the shape of the mouth. I sculpt the muzzle with some pieces of aluminum foil and glue them on the ball with hot glue. I also cover the entire ball with aluminum foil and make the brow the same way. For this Artdoll, I use freeform air, a lightweight 2-part epoxy putty that will help keep the head light. To use it, you just have to measure 2 equal volumes of each part and mix them thoroughly. You had to use water to smooth the clay and help it adhere to a surface. I form the eyes and the nose with the clay. I don't show it on video, but I do a lot of sanding after the clay has hardened to smooth everything and achieve the form I want. I continue by making the horns with aluminum foil and cover them with epoxy clay. I sand them to the right shape and put a dowel in the base. I flatten the head where the horns will go with a Dremel tool and drill a hole to insert the dowel. I fix the horns in place with hot glue and freeform air and finish them by engraving the lines with a carving bit. I continue with the jaws. I shape the general form with aluminum mesh and cover it with epoxy clay, taking care to follow the shape of the mouth. I then empty the aluminum foil of the top of the mouth to allow it and fill it with freeform air. It's time to make the mechanism for the mouth. It is the same principle as the hinge of a door. I use a popsicle stick to level and support the dowel. I glue it on the jaws and then glue the dowel on it. I form the mechanism with epoxy clay on the jaws and the top of the mouth. I make sure to remove the dowel once the epoxy clay is hardened enough. When the mechanism is done, I sculpt the teeth, the roof of the mouth and the tongue. I continue with the tail spike. I make the base with aluminum foil and form the spiral. I sand a lot in order to have the right shape. I then sculpt the spike for the back with a base of freeform air and cover them with Apoxie Sculpt. I finish by sculpting the claws with Apoxie Sculpt Super White. Now all the parts are sculpted. I can start painting them. I start with a coat of primer to help the paint adhere to the surface. I use Vallejo surface primers that I apply with an airbrush. I then use golden acrylic fluid paints, diluted with golden IFO medium. I airbrush the horns yellow with some orange and paint the engraved lines dark brown. I also paint the tail spike yellow and orange. I paint the mouth with a fleshy pink and I brush some black for the back of the throat, which I finish with a gradient. I then paint the teeth white, the tongue red, and the spike purple. For the eyes, I apply a coat of white before drawing them with a pencil. I create the iris with some purple and pink paint, apply it like a gradient, and finish with a black circle for the pupil. Once everything is painted, I put 2 coats of varnish on each part. I use a satin varnish for the horns, tail and claws, and a gloss varnish for the eyes and the mouth. Everything is now ready to be assembled. I put some felt where the 2 pieces meet to help with the friction. I then insert the dowel and fix it in place with some epoxy glue. I finally cover the hole with freeform air and sand everything for a smooth finish. I continue with the armature. I use 3/8 flexible plastic armature for this ardoll. I measure all the pieces using my references and assemble them with my pliers. As I don't have the proper attachment to assemble the spine and the front, I cut the parts with my Dremel tool and assemble them without glue. I continue by making the wings with 3 pieces of wire. I twist the 2 smallest wires around the main one. I then attach the wings to the body by wrapping the main wires around the armature and fix everything with epoxy clay. I continue with the fingers. I drill a hole and glue a wire in each claw. I then wrap the wires around the plastic armature and reinforce everything with freeform air. I drill a hole in the tail spike and glue it on the armature. I finish with the head. As it is too heavy even with the lightweight epoxy clay, I reinforce the neck with wire. I drill a hole in the head, insert the wire and wrap it around the neck. The neck will remain flexible while retaining its shape. Now that the armature is done, I wrap strips of quilt batting around it to shape the body of the ardoll. I tend to wrap a lot more than needed, as I wrap a thread around the whole body to tighten everything afterward. It helps to have a denser body that will retain its shape and stability. To make the pattern, I wrap plastic film around the body and cover everything with duct tape. I then mark where I want to cut the pieces with a Sharpie and cut them. I like to transfer them on paper first to continue working on them and then transfer them on fabric. I start with the scales of the torso. I cut all the pieces, labeling them to know the right order and sew them together. I like to sew all the pieces to form a pelt that I can wrap around the body and sew them directly on it. By doing that, the fabric is fitted to the body and I can better control its shape. I do the same thing with the paws. I sew all the pieces for the fingers and the palm. I then glue fabric pieces on the head using Fabri-Tac, taking care to leave some excess in order to sew them to the neck. I finished by gluing the fabric on the tail spike and the claws. I continue with the crest and wings. For the crest, I drill holes in the head and glue wires for support. I saw the fabric and fix it in place with Fabri-Tac. For the wings, I saw the interior line, making sure to leave enough space for the wires. I airbrush a little orange paint on the fabric and wrap strips of quilt batting around the armature of the wings. I put the fabric in place, making sure to insert the wires in the slot and close them. I finish with the details, like the dark lines for the scales on the torso. I put multiple layers of fabric paint to make the scales on the body. I finished the ardoll by gluing the spikes on the back with some X6000 glue. Spyro is now finished! I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you for the next project. Bye bye!